One of Australia's most respected entrepreneurs has sounded the alarm on the Australian housing market, stating that we're in the equivalent of the final stages of a Ponzi scheme, many years in the making. If his warnings prove to be accurate, we could be about to witness the mother of all housing crashes, with prices collapsing up to 50%. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If you own a property or not, you're gonna want to consider the housing market warning in today's video. And while we're at it, I've got another warning. If you don't like this video and subscribe to my channel, it's gonna really hurt my feelings. Just kidding, it would actually break my heart. Today I'm gonna be going through sections of an interview that Matt Barrie had on an episode with The Other Side Australia. I'll be providing my reaction and commentary specifically on the parts of this interview that deal with the Australian housing market. Check out the link in the description if you want to see the full interview. Matt Barrie is the CEO and founder of freelancer.com, but he's also very versed on the Australian economy, including the housing market. Let's hear what he has to say.
Great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Damien.
Why the great Australian scream?
Well, I think every Australian would realise that when you go to the pub and your schooner of beer now costs $12, $13, $14, sometimes $15. Your landlord's jacking up your rent by 10 or 15%. The banks are jacking up your mortgage 100, 200, 300%. Your energy bill's up 20, 25%. That something is terribly wrong in this country.
I think any logical thinker does recognize that something is definitely wrong in Australia. Even if you own a property, you must recognize that house prices are ridiculously expensive, especially when you compare them to wages. But on top of just expensive houses, we've now got surging inflation, a shocking rental crisis, and the latest is exploding interest rates for mortgage holders. If you had a bad breakup and your ex-partner left prawn shells hiding somewhere in your house, you would soon realize that something smells off. Now guess what? Something stinks with the Australian economy, and this could end up being much worse than some old prawn shells. Hey, if you're going through a breakup, don't get any ideas. Trust me, it stinks.
I think that successive generations, successive governments, this is not one government, this is many governments, have taken the path of easy, relentless growth in this country.
What does the path of easy, relentless growth look like? Well, Australia heavily relies on exporting its natural resources. We import growth through high levels of immigration, and we've relied heavily on ever-rising house prices because the majority of Australians own property, and when property owners feel wealthier through rising prices, they tend to spend more, which feeds into the economy.
Let's just keep pushing house prices up, right? So house prices have gone up over the last 60 years, 86 times.
86 times over the last 60 years? That's absolutely staggering. It's no wonder that housing has turned into a commodity for people to make wealth from, rather than a safe place for someone to live and feel secure and have some dignity. And guess what the largest religion recorded on the last census was? Australians obsessed with property. Just kidding, but not really. It's actually more like a cult, and you'll know that this cult is real if anything to do with property is mentioned more than 10 times at your next barbecue. Trust me, I've counted.
House prices don't go up because wages are going up. Wages haven't been going up for a very long time. In fact, many years ago, Matthias Cormann said that suppressing wages is really by design in our economic architecture.
So there's absolutely no chance that the reason for high house prices is due to fast rising wages.
And it's not because we're having more babies. In fact, every woman on the planet needs to have 2.1 children to maintain the population. I think we're currently about 1.6 in Australia.
Yep.
And we haven't been above 2.1 since 1975.
Australia's birth rate has basically fallen off a cliff lately. So you might think to yourself, less babies, less need for accommodation, house prices should be steady or start to fall. But sadly for many Australians, that's just not the case.
The only reason why house prices are going up is because we're bringing more people into the country. In fact, last year, 400,000 people, equivalent to the population of Canberra, right? Now, the problem is we can't build enough houses to house these people, right? The federal government's just recently announced they're going to build 1 million homes by 2029. On the current rate of bringing people in, there'll be 1 million homes for 3 million people. Right?
So this is highlighting that easy, relentless growth that the government is looking for, and it's doing it through immigration on steroids. But I don't think immigration is the only reason house prices are going up. You see, for 30 years, house prices have gone up. And you know what happens when you see gains year after year? It enters the psychology of an entire country. If you can make extremely tax-effective gains through property, and it works year after year after year, everyone wants a piece of that pie. Especially when people are making more through property than they are working an entire year at a job. And the sad thing that happened during COVID is that the government and RBA poured massive fuel under the housing market and inflated a ridiculous housing bubble and created speculative frenzy for people desperate to get in. Now, in my opinion, we're still going through the after effects of all that crazy demand. You see, house prices dipped just a little, and now everyone's trying to get back into the market because they don't want to miss out on those gains. And first home buyers are absolutely desperate to get into the market because they're facing a rental crisis and they don't want to be kicked out onto the streets. You see, many people just don't realize how much money property owners earned over COVID. They had 2 years of paying next to no interest, which means you could save a fortune. But on top of that, they had capital gains from every property they earned, around 30 to 40%. Just say a person owned around 3 average houses in a capital city. Since COVID, their house prices easily could have gone up about $1 million. So they're handed $1 million of gains just due to COVID policies. Isn't that like winning the lotto?
And really, I think it's late stage desperation in a Ponzi scheme. I mean, the housing market going up, for 60 years effectively, relentlessly, has led to a Ponzi of all proportions. I mean, it's a housing bubble of all bubbles. In the global financial crisis, you had bubbles in the housing market in the United States, you had bubbles in the UK, you had bubbles in Ireland, Portugal, and so forth. And what we did in 2008 is we doubled down. And already in 2008, Australian households were twice as indebted to the housing market than the Americans were.
So before the GFC, Australia was more indebted to housing than the US. But what happened during the GFC? US house prices got smashed, falling around 40%. But once again, Australia's housing market comes out unscathed. It's like there's a big red button called prop up the housing market, and any sign of trouble, you gotta push that button.
Press the button.
So Australia now, household debt's about 211% to GDP, which is double the US, a country that you normally associate with credit cards and debt.
So Australia has some of the highest levels of property debt in the world, and that really should be raising some alarm bells.
Households are basically at a breaking point, and mortgages are skyrocketing. We're currently at 3.85% in terms of the interest rate, which is lagging the US, the UK, and Canada, which are 4.5 to 5 and a bit. And we're at the point now where it's a complete replay of the movie The Big Short. The Big Short, which was the great financial crisis, we had Steve Carell. You had this iconic scene where he went to a strip club and he had a stripper dancing, saying she had 5 houses and a condo, and she was on what's called adjustable rate mortgages, right? These adjustable rate mortgages were written at about 2% interest rate, but after 2 to 3 years exploded about 300% higher. And that's exactly what's happening right now in Australia, is that all these mortgages during COVID were written about 1.95%, and this quarter, 17% of all fixed rate mortgages will come off those low rates and go up to a much, much higher rate.
Interest rates have really surged in Australia, but we're still lagging a lot of other countries, even though our inflation levels are very high. Now, many people didn't even think they'd get this high, and everything's suggesting that there's more rate rises to come. So at the moment, everything looks okay on the surface. House prices are still ultra high and have even been rising a little bit lately. We're yet to see many forced sales of properties, and everybody started going on overseas holidays again. But underneath the surface, things could be deteriorating quickly. Just like when the Titanic first hit the iceberg, nobody thought much of it. The Australian housing market could be headed for a house of cards type collapse. And like Matt Barrie said, we're seeing the sort of desperate measures that you'd see in a late stage Ponzi.
But we keep pushing the pain down the road, don't we? We never really feel the pain. With COVID even, we just borrowed our way out of the pain.
You know, in movies, when there was a battle and the king was in danger, the army would rush and create a barrier to try and protect the king.
Protect the king!
Now, Australia doesn't have a king, but we have a housing market. And if there's any sign of a real correction, as in house prices falling over 10%, there's going to be a massive rush to protect the housing market through increased immigration, lower interest rates, sweetener deals to get more people to buy property, allowing people to buy property with their super, and anything like that. We gotta protect the market.
And Sydney house prices are at astronomical levels. I mean, socioeconomists say that if the median household price to the median household income is 3 times or less, housing is affordable. If it's 3 to 4 times, it's unaffordable. If it's 4 to 5 times, it's severely unaffordable, and 5 and above is extremely unaffordable.
Trouble, yeah.
Sydney
Where are we
is
at?
13.3.
Sorry? What was that number?
13.3. Sydney's
13.3. Oh my God.
It's the second most expensive housing market in the world outside of Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is a tiny little island with limited space outside the most populous nation in the world. But there's no reason why Sydney should be 13.3. New York and London are 7. So at this point, house prices have gone way too far because every government doesn't know what to do and they kick the can down the road. House prices need to halve or wages need to double.
Well, we know that wages aren't going to double, so it looks like house prices have to halve. But can you even fathom something like that happening in Australia? Just by saying it, you get locked up for blasphemy. You see, the economy grows because people feel wealthier as their house prices rise. Just imagine what the loss of wealth effect would happen if house prices collapsed. Even a 30% drop in house prices would send significant shockwaves across the entire country. I can tell you now, it would be all everyone would be talking about. But if we are at the late stages of a Ponzi and we're headed towards our own GFC type event, an actual housing crash in Australia is definitely a possibility.
House prices have to halve, and the only way we can get house prices to halve, we can't increase supply because we've been trying desperately for 2 decades to build houses. Well, there's like 868 cranes in Australia building houses, 365 of them in Sydney, and there's 10 in New York and 14 in Chicago. We're the 4th highest nation in the OECD in terms of rate of building house supply.
Yes, Australia needs to do everything we can to increase housing supply. We already build stacks of housing, more than the majority of other countries. So blaming our current housing crisis on not enough houses being built is just not the reality.
So therefore, the only thing we can do is reduce demand. And Albanese has gone full Burko on immigration the other way around, turning every single tap he can on in a desperate attempt to prop everything up, desperately attempting to keep the housing market by therefore the banks solvent, because we're going to head into a GFC style event. Every housing market around the world has had a bubble pretty much in the Western world and deflated eventually. And we have doubled down, and we're actually at the limit now of what households can afford.
Nearly every other country has seen housing bubbles followed by housing crashes, but not Australia. Not yet. Matt Barrie has highlighted what the Australian housing market has turned into. A giant Ponzi scheme. You need new people who are able to keep buying houses at ever increasing prices. And when you can no longer find more people to do that, the entire house of cards, which is the Australian property market, will totally collapse. I'm Biko Konstantinos.